At the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where right now an American astronaut, a Japanese astronaut, and a Russian cosmonaut are strapped inside of a Soyuz spacecraft seated atop a Soyuz booster and ready to launch a little over an hour from now at 1:21 a.m. Central Time, 1:21 p.m. local time over in Baikonur. This is a live view right now of that Soyuz rocket on the Site Number 1 launch pad in Baikonur, where nearby a team of launch controllers are watching over all of the systems aboard the rocket, which is now fully fueled and ready for launch. No issues tracked so far throughout the day, which began with the fuel and oxidizer loading at about 9:16 p.m. Central Time Saturday night, or 9:16 a.m. in the morning on Sunday morning over at the launch site in Baikonur. That was all completed just about 2 hours later, and at this point the launch vehicle's control systems have been prepared and the gyros will soon be activated. Good evening, everybody, from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt, and we are coming to you live from Mission Control Houston. Along with different flight teams around the world supporting the International Space Station program, here in Mission Control, the teams are watching over the Expedition 54 crew and all of the station systems and are getting ready to support the increase from 3 to 6 crew members a little bit later this week as we get ready to add NASA astronaut Scott Tingle, Russian cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Anton Shkaplerov, who's representing Roscosmos, and JAXA astronaut Norishige Kanai. Those three are about to begin a planned 34.5 orbit flight to the International Space Station, with docking scheduled approximately 2 days after launch at 2:42 a.m. Central Time, 11:42 a.m. Tuesday in Moscow, where some of their colleagues, friends, and family will be watching the events unfold. The Soyuz MS-07 spacecraft is going to be docking with the Rassvet module, which was recently cleared just a few days ago with the Soyuz undocking. That module, also known as MRM-1, is a port on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the space station. And they're going to be joining the current station residents on board, NASA astronauts Mark Vande Hei and Joe Acaba, and also Russian cosmonaut and Expedition 54 commander Alexander Mazurkin. Vande Hei, Mazurkin, and Acaba arrived at the station aboard their own Soyuz spacecraft back on the night of September 12th here in Houston, and actually the early morning over on Greenwich Mean Time. And NASA astronaut Joe Acaba was actually a late addition to this Expedition 53 and 54 crew, which is originally scheduled with 2 Russian cosmonauts. Acaba was added to the crew after the Russian Space Agency decided to reduce the number of cosmonauts on the station until they get the Nauka Russian Multi-Purpose Module, or MLM, launched and installed on board, and that'll bump up the amount of science experiments available for the cosmonauts to perform on the Russian segment. Meanwhile, here in Houston, the team in Mission Control are going to be monitoring today's launch and getting updates from the flight from their Russian counterparts. The flight director, Vincent Lacourt, there on the right, is going to be leading the team for Soyuz launch and later on Sunday morning for the SpaceX arrival. And then the Capcoms just next to him off to the left are Leslie Ringo and Andreas Mogensen. And during the Soyuz's climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry gets downlinked to various ground stations along the flight path and then gets routed to the Russian Mission Control Center, which is located just outside of Moscow. And 1 spaceflight veteran and 2 first-time space flyers are getting ready to launch this evening aboard the Soyuz MS-07 spacecraft and make their way to the International Space Station. NASA astronaut Scott Tingle is going to be serving as a Soyuz flight engineer in the left seat. He was raised in Randolph, Massachusetts, and holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Southeastern Massachusetts University and got his Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Purdue University. Following his grad school, he worked for the Aerospace Corporation in El Segundo, California, as a member of the technical staff in their propulsion department. And before he became an astronaut, though, Tingle, who's a captain in the U.S. Navy, was commissioned as a naval officer back in 1991, earning his wings of gold as a naval aviator in 1993. Beginning his operational flying career with the Blue Diamonds in Lemoore, California, Tingle was deployed to the Western Pacific in North Arabian Gulf with carrier Air Wing 9 aboard the USS Nimitz. Following graduation from Navy Test Pilot School in 1998, Tingle served as an operational test pilot for several aircraft, including the FA-18 Super Hornet and the FA-18 AC Hornet and a number of other Super Hornets, along with the EA-18G Growler aircraft, certifying as aircraft carrier precision landing systems. And then during this time, Tingle also deployed to the Western Pacific and North Arabian Gulf, and also to the seas outside of Japan. He's accumulated more than 4,500 flight hours in 51 different types of aircraft, 750 carrier arrestments, and 54 combat missions. And he was selected back in 2009 as part of NASA's 20th astronaut class and completed his astronaut candidate training in June of 2011. And this, again, is going to be Captain Tingle's first venture into space. And again, Tingle is just one of 3 crew members launching today. He's going to serve alongside veteran Russian cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov, who's making his 3rd trip into space today. He was born in Sevastopol in the Ukraine. Shkaplerov, a second Class 2 Air Force pilot instructor who studied at the Chernigov High Air Force Pilot School and the Kacha High Air Force Pilot School, graduating with honors. He then studied at the Russian Air Force Academy, qualifying as pilot engineer researcher and receiving a master's degree in engineering. Following graduation, served as a senior pilot instructor in the Russian Air Force, flying 3 different types of aircraft, also an instructor of general parachute training. Shkaplerov has performed more than 300 parachute jumps, and from 2003 to 2005 trained in spaceflight basics, qualifying as a cosmonaut in 2005. And then from April to October in 2007, served as Director of Operations for the Russian Space Agency, stationed over here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And then his first flight started aboard Soyuz TMA-22 back in March of 2013, where he served as Soyuz commander and as the flight engineer on ISS expeditions 29 and 30. During that time, he performed a spacewalk with a duration of 6 hours and 15 minutes outside the space station. Then beginning in November of 2014, Shkaplerov served as commander of Soyuz TMA-15M as a flight engineer for expeditions 42 and 43 from November 2014 to June of 2015. Right now on his resume, Shkaplerov has more than 364 days in space. He's going to serve as the commander of the Soyuz MS-07 spacecraft today, and is going to transition from Expedition 54 flight engineer to Expedition 55 commander in March, after the departure of Mark Vande Hei, Alexander Mazurkin, and Joe Acaba. And then rounding out the crew of 3 today is going to be JAXA astronaut Norishige Kanai, who also is going to be making his first trip to space today. Kanai was born in Tokyo and brought up in Chiba, and then he graduated from the National Defense Medical College. After that graduation, he worked as a surgeon and a diving medical officer at various hospitals in Japan, before being selected to be an astronaut candidate by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency in September of 2009. He went on to participate in about 2 years of astronaut candidate training in NASA's 20th astronaut class alongside his current crewmate, Scott Tingle. They trained here at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, and that included intensive instruction on all the different station systems, spacewalk training, scientific and technical briefings, lessons in robotics, physiological training, flight training using the T-38 jets, water, wilderness survival training, the full gamut that all of these astronauts go through. Then he was certified as a space station astronaut in July of 2011. He was also a participant in the 20th NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations Mission, or NEMO, from July to August of 2015. And now getting some playback from video earlier this morning, right after the crew was awakened at about 4:21 p.m. Central Time, 4:21 a.m. over in Baikonur. And that's about 9 hours prior to the launch, participating in all of the final pre-launch activities. Starting off here, we see them conducting the long-standing tradition of autographing their doors in the Cosmonaut Hotel in Baikonur, Kazakhstan. This is the hotel where all of the crew members are quarantined for a little under 2 weeks before their launch. And then also getting a traditional blessing from a Russian Orthodox priest. And just behind them, you can see the backup crew for this mission before they did the walk out from the hotel. You can see them bundled up. It is very much winter time over there in Baikonur, and at about 7:21 in the morning over there in Kazakhstan, they departed the Cosmonaut Hotel to board a bus for the ride over to the Integration and Suit-Up facility, also known as Building 254 on the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Crew getting a chance to wave goodbye to the gathered program officials from the various space agencies, also friends and family in attendance there in Baikonur. Again, that first departing the Cosmonaut Hotel, that occurring at about 7:21 in the morning over there in Baikonur. The crew then arrived at Building 254, that Integration and Suit-Up facility, about 40 minutes after departing the Cosmonaut Hotel. Once they arrive there, they each undergo final medical exams and then get suited up in their Sokol launch and entry suits. They'll wear these for all of the dynamic phases while on board the Soyuz, including this launch and also at the end of their mission when they return home in the exact same vehicle.
Commander, do we need the insert here? Thank you very much. Yes, I hear you loud and clear. Thank you. Yes, everything is great. Thank you.
One at a time, getting assisted by the various suit techs from Roscosmos as they got into these Sokol launch and entry suits that they'll wear throughout all of the dynamic phases of flight this evening. This suit up taking place about 4.5 hours to the launch time.
Еще раз.
One more time.
Медленно.
Прям улыбается.
Everybody's smiling.
And then once suited up, they moved into another room where, if you look right to the bottom of your screen with the engineers preparing it, they get into a mock-up of the Soyuz seat one at a time, and the suits actually get pressurized just to ensure the integrity of all of the seals on the suits. Meanwhile, on the other side of the glass that this camera is looking for, friends, family, and program guests gather for one final chance to talk to the crew members before they head off to the launch pad. And just here we can see first in the chair Shkaplerov. You can see the suit actually puffing up a little bit as it is getting pressurized. Again, this done before they move on to the launch pad just to ensure the integrity of all of the seals on the spacesuit itself. And then again, going one at a time, once that's complete, they get to speak to various gathered friends, family members, and program guests from each of the respective space agencies from behind a protective pane of glass, all of that just to maintain the crew's quarantine status that they're in for about 2 weeks prior to their launch.
Куда тебе столько часов?
Папа, как дела?
Daddy, how are you?
Рабочую одежду одел. Пойду на работу.
I donned my work outfit, going to work now.
Вы спали еще? 1 час? Хорошо, вчера посидели.
Did you sleep any? Yeah, about 1 hour. Well, we had fun yesterday.
Пап, как вы доехали?
Daddy, how was your
Ну,
trip?
в автобусе там, фильм показывали. Мы первый сделали, родственники.
Well, we took a bus ride.
Все вещи собрали, да, чемоданы?
Did you pack up your suitcases?
Сегодня уже там. Именинница где?
Where is the birthday girl?
Happy birthday. Yeah, nice day. Да, телефон у Вадика. Тополю.
Do you have the phone?
Да. В своем положении. Смотри, на улице холодно, здесь уже минус 20 где-то. Сейчас будет
It's cold outside. It's 20 degrees below 0 centigrade here.
не стоять. Когда закрою люк, там ты подвижешь. Не длину смотри.
Я буду высыпаться.
I'm going to be catching up on my sleep.
Ну, вышло отлично. Да. А? Я пробую, что это.
Сейчас, я не могу.
Каждый там лежал, засыпал.
Время, которое на станции. Это часы, которые герметизация, сейчас ты одеваешь.
That's what we were saying.
Что?
Возвращаться в эту скафандр.
Каждый свой скафандр.
Удачи, стыковаться название.
お父さんとさせてくれてありがとう。お父さんとお母さんが心を込めて美味しいごちそうを作って待っていますから、それ約束。
理事長、朝早くからありがとうございます。本当に力づけられます。
ね、自分がいなくちゃチームは成り立たない。
Я желаю вам
Hello,
удачного полета
Anton, your crew. I'm wishing you a successful flight,
и выполнения всей программы полета. А мы
good
вас
work, and completion of your
берегите станцию.
flight program. Take good care of the station.
Have a great time on Space Station. You take care of the Space Station for us and return it in good shape and after you leave, and maybe better shape than when you arrive. So thank you all for all your training, all your hard work, all your efforts. We're ready to support you on the ground.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
It'll be a wonderful day for a flight into space. Just a few hours after you launch, Dragon will be arriving, and your crewmates on board ISS will be Japan and Dragon. And so we'll have positioned some, maybe a little work and maybe a few goodies for you when you arrive. Have a great time up there. We're very excited to see you up in space and know that we're down here working for you and ready to help you in any way. So enjoy your time on board.
Thank you.
And with all of the suit-up activities complete, getting an extra layer to combat the cold weather, but getting the chance to walk out of that integration and suit-up facility.
Dear Chairman of the Government Commission, the crew of the Soyuz transportation vehicle is ready for flight. Anton Shkaplerov, commander of the crew. Thank you. Please turn to the right. Could you wave to the audience?
And with that, the crew then boarded buses once again. This at about 10:21 in the morning over in Baikonur for the ride out to launch pad number 1. The drive takes about 25 minutes or so. And they arrive at the rocket along again with some managers from the various space agencies.
Commander of the Soyuz MS-07 vehicle is ready for launch. Crew ready for launch.
And with one final chance to wave farewell to those gathered at the foot of the pad, they made their way onto the elevator and to the top of the Soyuz rocket to load into the Soyuz spacecraft, where they've been for a couple of hours now. Almost 2 hours, actually. The rocket, billowing oxygen, was fueled about 3 hours prior to the planned liftoff time. And then emblazoned upon this Soyuz rocket's an image celebrating the 60th anniversary this year of Sputnik, the first artificial Earth satellite, which was launched aboard a modified R-7 rocket back on October 4th, 1957, from the exact same launch pad that we're going to see a rocket liftoff from today. And right now we are just about 40 minutes and 20 seconds away from the launch of the next 3 members of the Expedition 54 crew to the International Space Station. The mission launches under the call sign Astray, and that was chosen by Soyuz MS-07 commander Anton Shkaplerov, so you'll hear them refer to that. That'll be their call sign on the ride uphill. Astray is the same call sign used by Shkaplerov for his previous 2 flights as Soyuz commander back in March of 2013 and November of 2014. The crew patch, shaped like a sphere, a centuries-old astronomical instrument used to represent the heavens. The crew's name and national flags are positioned along the outer ring of the patch, with the Roscosmos logo and the name of the spacecraft shown on an inner ring. And the constellation of Capricorn appears at the top of the patch, with the 3 larger stars representing the Soyuz crew members. And then groups of 2 and 3 smaller stars represent the children of Shkaplerov and Tingle. In the center, we see the Soyuz flying high over the Earth, representing continued human presence in orbit, while the moon appears in the background, symbolizing some of the future aspirations for space exploration. Then the talisman and the zero-G indicator that we should see hanging over the onboard crew during the ascent is a small toy dog belonging to the daughter of Expedition 54 Soyuz commander Anton Shkaplerov. That was installed on the Soyuz instrument panel during the crew's in-cabin pre-launch preparation activities last week. So as we can see right now, the launch pad service structure components being lowered, the clamshell gantry service towers being retracted in preparation for this liftoff. At this point, the suit leak checks have already actually been completed and reported good to go. And then pretty soon the emergency escape tower will soon be armed. That's the very tip of the rocket. That escape tower would fire in the event of any problem during the launch. System designed to pull the spacecraft and the crew clear of the booster, enabling the Soyuz capsule to then parachute to a safe landing in the event of an emergency during the launch or the early stages of the climb to orbit. And as we get closer to launch, we will see several other events unfold. At just 4 minutes prior to launch, the combustion chamber nitrogen purge begins. And then at T-minus 2:45, the booster propellant pressurization takes place. And then the events continue with the first umbilical tower separating at T-minus 35 seconds and the second umbilical tower separating at T-minus 15 seconds. And then at just T-minus 12 seconds, the launch command gets issued. All of that culminating ultimately in the launch with the Soyuz spacecraft as the countdown clock reaches 0. And that clock scheduled to reach 0 at 1:21 a.m. Central Time, 1:21 p.m. local time over in Baikonur. And during that climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry from Soyuz is downlinked to ground stations along the flight path. All that then gets routed to the launch control blockhouse near the launch pad in Baikonur, and then on to the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow. Flight's controlled from Baikonur until shutdown of that 3rd stage engine, when it then gets transitioned over to the Russian Flight Control Center. So the climb to orbit itself will also come in several stages, as this is a 3-stage rocket. That first stage will burn for about 1 minute and 58 seconds, and then we'll see the 4 strap-on boosters drop away. Then the shroud surrounding the Soyuz spacecraft will also jettison, and that ultimately leads up to the second stage shutdown. The second stage, just the inner core, so actually firing during the first stage, and then the third stage will ignite shortly after that, actually doing something called a hot ignition or a hot staging technique. That will continue to fire until about 8 minutes and 45 seconds after launch. The third stage will shut down, the spacecraft will separate, and then the Soyuz will be in its preliminary orbit. And then just a few seconds after it reaches that orbit, the vehicle's command and control system will get activated. A number of stored commands will deploy the navigation and communications antennas and the solar arrays to begin collecting power for use by all of the onboard batteries to generate electricity for the Soyuz systems. And the first of the antennas that typically gets deployed will be the core's rendezvous and docking antennas, and that's what gets used to provide automatic range and rate of closure information for the final approach by the Soyuz when it's docking to that Rassvet module. And immediately after reaching orbit, the crew will oversee a programmed activation sequence, activating a variety of systems just before the spacecraft passes out of range of those Russian ground stations, activating things like the power supply system, the radio communications, and also the motion control system. And during the first orbit of today's flight, it will automatically execute the first of several orbital adjustment burns planned as it fine-tunes its path and gradually raises its orbit to the International Space Station's level over the next 2 days. And today's launch marking the 7th flight of a newer version of the Soyuz Modernized System, or MS series of vehicles. The rocket itself stands 162 feet tall, tipping the scales at 680,000 pounds, and consists of the Soyuz MS-07 spacecraft inside a protective shroud at the top, and then the 3-stage Soyuz FG booster below. The spacecraft was mated to the booster, and all of the stages joined together on Thursday, with the rocket beginning its trek to the launch pad just after 6 a.m. Baikonur time on Friday, arriving less than 2 hours later, where we just saw it was raised to its vertical position for all of the final pre-launch preparations, with the spacecraft now sitting where it is now. The Soyuz spacecraft, with its 3 crew members on board, sits above the 3 stages of the Soyuz booster, which uses kerosene and liquid oxygen as the propellant. The first stage has 4 liquid engines strapped to the side of the core booster. Those will all ignite. The Soyuz thrust will gradually build up, eventually overcoming the 4 launch locks in place, and then no pyrotechnics necessary. Once they overpower those weights, it's able to swing free and the rocket will leap away from the Kazakh steppe. Again, those 4 strap-on boosters will fire for about 1 minute 58 seconds before they drop away, their job completed. Throughout the entirety of that, the first stage, the core stage, continues to burn. That once it's no longer needed, the launch escape tower will jettison, and then those strap-on boosters will also drop away. The core stage will continue and serve as the second stage, and that'll burn until about 4 minutes 57 seconds into flight. At that point, they'll do a hot staging technique where the third stage will actually begin to fire that lattice structure, allowing the rocket engine exhaust to move out while the second stage is still attached before it drops away. And then the third stage will continue to burn until about 8 minutes 45 seconds into the flight. And then once that separates, the Soyuz will be in its preliminary orbit. And the Soyuz spacecraft right now is scheduled to dock in about 2 days, about 34.5 orbits after today's launch. And then at the time of the launch today, the station itself will be over south-central Kazakhstan, just to the northeast of Baikonur, at an altitude of roughly 260 statute miles. Then launched precisely timed for the moment when the Earth's rotation will place Baikonur in the same plane of the orbit of the International Space Station. And again, this planned 2-day rendezvous will culminate with docking to the Rassvet module, that targeted right now for 2:43 a.m. Central Time, 3:43 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, December 19th. And so still atop the rocket, Scott Tingle, Anton Shkaplerov, and Norishi Kanai. Right now, we are just a little over 30.5 minutes away from launch. The whole Soyuz spacecraft itself is 23.5 feet long and weighs in at 15,650 pounds and is comprised of 3 separate modules. The descent module, situated right in the middle of the Soyuz vehicle, has the crew and then contains customized seats for each of them during the launch, entry, landing phases of the flights. It contains all of the controls and displays necessary for the flight. It also has life support systems, batteries for the re-entry and landing. Also has the parachutes and soft landing rocket engines to slow the Soyuz down just before touchdown when landing in Kazakhstan. There's 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module that are used to control the spacecraft's orientation or attitude during descent until parachute deployment. It also has a guidance, navigation, and control system to maneuver the vehicle during that descent phase of the mission. As the middle piece, it weighs 6,393 pounds and has a tight habitable volume of 141 cubic feet. About 110 pounds of payload can be returned to Earth in the module, which is the only portion that returns to Earth. Up through the hatchway, though, to the top of the spacecraft is the orbital module, which is connected via the pressurized hatch. And then it has a small amount of room for the crew to move around in during the flight to the station, much more useful on these 2-day flights. Has a volume of 230 cubic feet with the docking mechanism at the very top, a hatch, and also the rendezvous antennas located at that front end. The docking mechanism is used to dock with the space station, and that hatch allows entry into the orbiting laboratory. There's also a forward-looking window in the module that the crews can use to take manual measurements of distance and closing speed using a laser rangefinder in the event of failure of that automated rendezvous system. Also, again, has a little bit of space, a bathroom area for the crew, and a small space for water and food, again, for that 2-day flight. Meanwhile, the propulsion module on the bottom houses the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and communications and control equipment. The propulsion portion of the module handles all of the orbital maneuvers, including those that are going to be needed for the rendezvous with the International Space Station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. And just before they're deployed, there are 2 solar arrays folded against the body of the propulsion module, which separates from the descent module after the deorbit burn along with the orbital module. And those solar panels span almost 35 feet. And the entire spacecraft serving not only as a crew transport vehicle to and from the station, but also as an emergency return vehicle in the event the crew should have to leave the station unexpectedly. But checking back in with this still a live view of Soyuz on the launch pad in Baikonur. And right now we are 27 minutes, 20 seconds and counting away from liftoff. And once again, today's Soyuz MS-07 launch is going to begin astronaut Scott Tingle's first time flying into space. Why don't we now take a moment to learn a little bit more about Scott Tingle and what inspired him to become an astronaut.
I've had the opportunity to do a lot of great things in a 30-year career, engineering, flying airplanes, and now here with NASA. And the groups of people that I've worked with have been absolutely incredible. Well, the one consistency across the board is that they have provided me with a lifetime of inspiration. So I grew up in the town of Randolph, Massachusetts, kind of a small town, and the folks at home knew how driven I was. They knew how interested in science, engineering, and space flight I was, and they were nothing but supportive the whole way. There's literally thousands of people that I've worked with in my military career. Absolutely unbelievable. Some of the most inspirational young Americans you'd ever meet in your life. You'll walk down in the bowels of the ship and you'll see these 18, 19, 20-year-olds covered head to toe in grease, just coming off a 24-hour shift so that we could fly our airplanes safely and efficiently. Absolutely inspirational. When things get hard for me or challenging, I think of those folks, and it makes me want to do better. And that's one of the things that I'm finding is very consistent throughout my career. When I came here, we've got civil servants, we've got contractors, we've got military, you name it. And we all have one goal, one mission, and watching the team work together is just inspiring. My ultimate inspiration is the love and support I get from my family. They've been so solid over the years that there's absolutely no way I could be doing all this without their support. I'm Scott Tingle, and I'm a NASA astronaut.
And that was a quick look at Scott Tingle and the path that he took to become an astronaut, but that, of course, doesn't tell the whole story. So while the clocks continue to count down to the launch of the Soyuz MS-07 vehicle, why don't we check in one more time with Scott for 5 things you may not have known about him before this flight. Let's take a look.
So you want to know what 5 things people don't know about me? Well, my first car was a 1972 Ford Galaxie 500. It had no trunk in it, it was rusted out, and had about 180,000 miles on it at the time. When I went to high school, it was a vocational high school, and I majored in machine drafting. We had about 18 folks in there, and we still keep in touch today. I used to race motorcycles from age 12 to 16 with the New England Minicycle Association. My first mini bike was a Suzuki MT-50. When I was younger, grades 1 through 3, I went to school and while I lived in Bangor, Maine. My teacher's name was Mrs. Sullivan. So growing up, I needed resources to do fun things. So I got my first job at age 14 sweeping floors and washing dishes at Zeppi's Bagel Bakery in Randolph, Massachusetts.
So right now we are exactly 23 minutes and counting away from launch of the Soyuz spacecraft from Baikonur. Why don't we take a couple of moments though? For those of you following along on social media, you can use the hashtag AskNASA to send us questions during our broadcast. I'll do my best to get to a couple of them. We got one from Manish on Twitter who wanted to know how often astronauts conduct scientific experiments on board the station, and that's an easy one. It's every single day. Every single day they're working on a different experiment, and typically for the 6 months or so that they're on board, over 350 experiments sometimes are conducted. So definitely a lot happening every single day for these crew members on board the International Space Station. Rafaela on Twitter wanted to know why the old 2-day protocol has been chosen this time. So that referring to the fact that it's going to take them 2 days to arrive at the station instead of 6 hours. And that all comes down to orbital mechanics. With this launch, this day being the launch day, it essentially boils down to the distance between where they're launching from in the International Space Station. Whatever that distance is plays a lot into the mechanics of how quickly it takes for them to raise their orbit. In this case, it'll be a little bit longer than that 6-hour one that you might be used to seeing. Recently. And then from Greg on Twitter, he wanted to know how uncomfortable is it in the capsule to the station? How much wiggle room do you have? It's not a whole lot of room, as there are 3 of them in there. And they are strapped into those seats, and it's meant to keep you very immobile, mostly for the landing operations, just to keep you extra safe as you touch down in Kazakhstan. So not the most comfortable space in the world, but with spacecraft it's all about saving weight and keeping things as small as possible. But the Soyuz, a very robust, a very effective vehicle for delivering astronauts to and from the International Space Station. And I think the price of spending 6 months in gravity is definitely worth a little bit of cramped environments on the ride uphill. So again, if you want to ask any questions on social media, use that hashtag AskNASA. Connect, follow, and share, and we will do our best to get to a couple of more of those as we count down to launch. Currently 20 minutes, 30 seconds, and counting. And while we do have these great camera views, a group of NASA representatives are actually there in Baikonur, just a short distance away from the launch pad. For a quick update on activities there, why don't we go now to NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius.
Dan, I think it would be an understatement to say it's an Arctic kind of day here in the Central Asian desert. Temperatures hovering in the teens as we shiver our way toward launch time. To put it succinctly, it is bitterly cold here. This final launch of the year features officials from NASA, Roscosmos, and the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. The NASA represented as usual by Bill Gerstenmaier, the Associate Administrator for Exploration, and ISS Program Manager Kirk Shireman. This launch comes just 3 days after Soyuz landing operations took place 250 miles northeast of here that resulted in a homecoming for Randy Bresnik, Paulo Nespoli, and Sergei Rosansky. Now a new crew with a veteran Soyuz commander and 2 first-time flyers are set to replace them in this final liftoff of the year from Yuri Gagarin's launch pad. After launch, we'll try to thaw out and fly back to Moscow, where we'll anchor docking and hatch opening coverage in the wee hours U.S. time Tuesday morning. That's it for now from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
And thank you, Rob. Eloquent as usual. I can almost feel the cold myself from that description there. But again, Rob Navius, NASA Public Affairs Officer, and the various NASA officials, along with folks from Roscosmos and the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, just a little under a mile away from that launch pad, getting ready to watch these 3 crew members rocket off the face of the planet and make their way onto the International Space Station. Right now, as you can see from the countdown clock, we are just a little over 18 minutes away from that planned launch, which should come right at about 1:21 a.m. Central Time here in Houston, and at Baikonur on the other side of the world, 1:21 p.m. in the afternoon. As mentioned, the crew already completed their leak checks, reported to be good to go. The teams here in Houston have already done a poll and are go for launch. And again, as we're just about 17 minutes away from launch, it's been a very busy week for traffic with the International Space Station. The docking port to which they'll be arriving, the Rosviet module, was cleared just a little bit earlier this week, back on Wednesday, when 3 crew members departed the International Space Station, bringing Expedition 53 to an end. NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik, along with ESA astronaut Paulo Nespoli and Russian cosmonaut Sergei Rosansky, landed in Kazakhstan after spending just under 139 days on board the orbiting laboratory. And again, at the time of their undocking, Expedition 54 officially began, with the 3 crew members who are still on board and currently awaiting their 3 newest crewmates to arrive in just 2 days from this launch. Right now on board, Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin, who's going to be the commander for Expedition 54, who's a second-time flyer on board the space station. And he's joined right now by 2 NASA astronauts, Mark Vande Hei, a first-time flyer and the 228th individual to visit the International Space Station, and Joe Acaba, a NASA astronaut, making his 3rd flight and his 2nd long-duration stay. Again, Joe Acaba, a late addition to the crew. Those three have been on board since mid-September, when they also launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan and were able to dock in just a 6-hour trek later. You can see all of their various social media accounts right here on your screen. Highly encourage you to follow them during their mission, as they are sharing a pretty much daily dose of space with a lot of incredible pictures, videos, and other tastes of life on board the International Space Station, where you can see the various science experiments that, again, they're working on every single day. And also, as always, those gorgeous views of planet Earth from just about 260 statute miles above. In particular, Joe Acaba, a former educator, has been doing a lot with education during the Year of Education on station. He's going to be teaching a bit of science class along with his fellow crew members through something called STEMonstrations, doing different science lessons using the microgravity environment to make things a little bit more interesting, as living in that microgravity tends to do. And so be sure to follow Acaba along. He's just one of 2 educators that's going to be on board the International Space Station over the next year. Throughout the second half of 2018, NASA astronaut Ricky Arnold, who's scheduled to launch in March, will also be on board, bringing that Year of Education on station all the way to next September, when it will be complete. For now, though, 14 minutes, 20 seconds and counting away from launch. You can see a clear sky there, but definitely some frigid temperatures, as we just heard from NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius. The same was the case for the landing earlier this week, when the 3 crew members returned to sub-zero temperatures with the wind chill, so things a little bit warmer, if you could consider it warmer there in Baikonur for the launch today, but no impediments to the rocket itself. The hardy Soyuz spacecraft on top of the Soyuz rocket fueled up and ready to go in under 14 minutes from now. The teams haven't tracked any issues with the rocket throughout the day. The crew reported to be good on board, actually getting piped into the Soyuz spacecraft from the launch controllers there at the blockhouse in Baikonur. Again, the rocket automated on its ascent uphill, everything monitored by the blockhouse there in Baikonur, and all of that then relayed to the flight control team in Koryov, just outside of Moscow, at the Russian Mission Control Center. And they'll take over control of the mission once the spacecraft separates from the 3rd stage, which happens at about 8 minutes and 45 seconds into the flight. And again, this will be just under a 9-minute flight to orbit. So once we see the rocket take off, a series of events will unfold. That first stage, so the 4 strap-on boosters and the core engine firing for the first minute and 58 seconds. After that shuts down, those 4 strap-on boosters drop away. Just before that, the launch escape tower, and then the shroud jettisons shortly after that. The second stage, which is that core stage, burning during the first and continuing as the second stage, will shut down after about 4 minutes and 47 seconds into the flight. The third stage actually igniting, doing a hot staging technique, coming online and then continuing to burn until about 8 minutes and 45 seconds. And then the third stage will shut down, drop away, and the spacecraft will be in orbit. That preliminary orbital insertion coming at about 8 minutes 49 seconds post-launch. And again, it'll be a 2-day flight for these crew members as they gradually raise their orbit. After they'll complete 34.5 revolutions around planet Earth as they chase down the International Space Station, ultimately docking on Tuesday, at which point they'll bring Expedition 54 back up to a full 6-person contingent. And as we count to the 11-minute mark away from launch, still seeing some of the excess oxidizer billowing out of the rocket itself, everything continuing to track on time, 11 minutes and counting. And meanwhile, here in Mission Control Houston, the team's tracking 2 vehicles right now as they're getting ready to watch the Soyuz launch, but also on the more immediate horizon for them, the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft is getting close to making its final approach to the International Space Station. The vehicle, which is packed with a little over 4,800 pounds of supplies and science experiments for the Expedition 54 crew, is set to arrive just a couple of hours after launch. And so for those of you who are going to be staying up all night with us, we'll actually be bringing you live coverage of SpaceX rendezvous and capture coming at 3:30 a.m. Central Time, 4:30 a.m. Eastern. Vehicle scheduled to arrive and park about 10 meters away from the station and get captured by the waiting Expedition 54 astronauts at approximately 5 a.m. Central Time, 6 a.m. Eastern. So again, going to be a very busy Sunday, capping off an extremely busy week for the International Space Station. A lot of flurry of activity to close out the year for the orbiting laboratory, but everything right now here in the room spread out, looking at Dragon obviously as it continues making its way to the station, but also all eyes out on the Baikonur Cosmodrome with the Soyuz spacecraft with Scott Tingle, Norishige Kanai, and Anton Shkaplerov strapped in and just a little over 9 minutes away from launch. And for those of you just joining us here on Facebook Live, as we bring you our Soyuz launch coverage, we're just a little over 8 minutes and 20 seconds away from liftoff. The Soyuz spacecraft on launch pad number 1 out at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, fully fueled and ready to rocket away from the Kazakh steppe. 3 crew members inside, Scott Tingle, Anton Shkaplerov, and Norishige Kanai, strapped into the Soyuz. And here we're getting some in-cabin views. On the right side, you can see Anton Shkaplerov. He's in the center seat, and he is the commander for this mission, responsible for overseeing the spacecraft systems. To his right and to the left on your screen is Kanai from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. And then just off screen right now is NASA astronaut Scott Tingle. He's in the left seat of the spacecraft, just to the left of Shkaplerov. And we'll get views of the rocket as it lifts off from the launch pad. A clear sky, so should be able to see the vehicle late into the afternoon sky as it rockets over the Kazakh steppe. So at this point, the first and second stage engines are ready for launch, and telemetry has been received from the rocket, indicating that all the primary and backup systems are ready for launch. As we are now under 7 minutes away, pre-launch operations are about to wrap up. We should start hearing some voice calls from out there in Baikonur as we hear things like the launch key getting inserted, the various propellant tanks getting pressurized for launch. Getting another view inside the cabin, and our first views of NASA astronaut Scott Tingle. He's at the top of your screen there. And again, that's Anton Shkaplerov at the bottom of your screen in the center seat of the vehicle. And 5 minutes, 40 seconds away from launch, getting reports, all systems go, everything ready. Things going to start picking up a lot now, so in the words that Scott Tingle passed along to us, as it's often said on aircraft carriers where he cut his teeth as a Navy pilot, it's time to get busy, chop chop, hubba bubba, as he put it, and everything looking good. 5 minutes and 10 seconds away from liftoff. And we just got confirmation the launch key has been inserted in the launch bunker. Yes, it's an actual key, and it's used to transition the launch sequence into its automatic mode. 4 minutes, 49 seconds and counting away from liftoff. And also at this point, onboard systems are switched to onboard control, and the commander's cockpit displays and controls have all been activated. You can see the crew members' helmets are closed. That's put them on this oxygen flowing into their suits. Four minutes, 15 seconds and counting. Three minutes, 45 seconds, just getting confirmation that the fuel lines, other elements of the engines being purged with nitrogen. This helps to fireproof them by removing any excess vapors from the fuel and the oxidizer. 3.5 minutes from launch. Two minutes, 35 seconds, getting confirmation the booster tanks now being pressurized for flight. This helps to optimize the flow of fuel and helps to actually add some structural support to the rocket itself. 2 minutes, 20 seconds from liftoff. One minute, 10 seconds away from liftoff. Everything's still looking good. The Soyuz about to go on internal power. T-minus 1 minute and counting. The first umbilical tower separating from the booster. We are under 30 seconds. Confirmation of auto sequence start, the second umbilical separating. The launch command has been issued. And with that, we see the fires lit, the engines start to roar, and lift off. Scott Tingle, Anton Shkaplerov, and Norishige Kanai on their way to the International Space Station. Anton Shkaplerov already calling down everything going well on board, everything reported fine. Performance calls coming in, the engines performing nominally or normally. Getting good first stage performance, the Soyuz delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust from those 4 boosters and that single core engine. The first stage measures 68 feet in length and 24 feet in diameter and is going to burn liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds into the flight. Still getting good performance calls, the crew feeling good as they light up the sky over there in Baikonur. Again, it's a clear day, so we should get pretty spectacular views of the rocket as it makes its 8-minute, 45-second climb into orbit. Already more than 1 minute, 45 seconds into the flight, everything's still going well with the rocket. And just there we see the first stage separating. Those 4 strap-on boosters breaking away. Their job completed, dropping away the rocket at an altitude already of about 28 statute miles. And you can see them making what's known the Korolev cross. The 4 engines slowly going to make their way back down here to Earth. The vehicle now being propelled by the core stage, traveling over 3,300 miles an hour already. And getting confirmation that the shroud has been jettisoned. The rocket is about 48 miles in height already. Also getting views still inside the cabin. You can see a quick wave. At this point, the vehicle is traveling at a speed of about 4,700 miles an hour. And again, the second stage, that core stage performing as expected. It measures 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter, with that single engine and 4 fuel chambers, getting a wave and a thumbs up from Norishige Kanai there. Sitting in the right seat, making his first flight into orbit today along with Scott Tingle. The seasoned veteran in the middle there, Anton Shkaplerov, overseeing the rocket's flight into orbit. Again, under that second stage right now, we're already 3 minutes and 50 seconds since the liftoff. And then in this animation, you can see the rocket as it continues to climb to orbit. That second stage with the single engine and 4 fuel chambers provides between 178,000 and 222,000 pounds of thrust, depending on the altitude, for its 3 minutes and 28 seconds of operation. It's going to continue burning for about 30 more seconds, and then it's going to use what's again known as a hot stage technique, where the third stage is actually going to ignite while the second is still burning. That's why it has that lattice-like structure between the two stages, an open area between the second and third. And now standing by for that hot staging and the separation of the second stage. And the visiting vehicle officer confirming the second stage has separated, confirmed. The booster separating at an altitude of about 105 miles. It's now being propelled by the single engine of the third stage, that providing 67,000 pounds of thrust, and it's going to burn for another 4 minutes and 2 seconds. That's going to put them into their preliminary orbit. So this is the third and final stage of this flight. Getting great views inside the cabin, seeing Scott Tingle and Anton Shkaplerov. Everything going great so far. In that cabin view, you can see dangling from the top that it's a stuffed animal. That is a dog that was from Anton Shkaplerov's daughter, and that's going to be our 0G indicator. So once their flight is complete, you'll actually see that start to float along, possibly with some of the papers in the cabin. That's how they know they've made it into their preliminary orbit. Getting good reports from the crew, everyone feeling great. 6 minutes into the flight. So we're 6.5 minutes so far into the flight, everything going great. The first and second stages of the rocket performing without any issues before dropping away, now being propelled by the third stage. Still getting reports, all the control systems on the vehicle operating nominally or normally. The third stage still has about 1 minute and 45 seconds to go before it gets ready to cut off and separate. And once that third stage delivers the Soyuz into orbit, a number of pre-programmed commands will be executed to prepare the Soyuz for flying around in low Earth orbit. And that'll include deploying the solar arrays and a number of navigational antennas on the top of the vehicle. 7.5 minutes and counting up from liftoff. At this point, the vehicle traveling at a velocity of almost 13,500 miles an hour. And we're a little over 8 minutes since the launch. The crew on station getting the call that 3 new crew members are well on their way already. The third stage continuing to fire, should have another 20 seconds or so. And then we might see a little bit of a jolt for these crew members inside as the third stage cuts off and separates. Standing by in the next couple of seconds for third stage shutdown. And we missed it a bit in the video there, but getting a little kick. The third stage confirmed to be separated. And good news from the visiting vehicle officer, all of the antennas and the solar arrays deployed successfully. So confirmation of spacecraft separation coming at an altitude of about 126 or 125 statute miles. The third stage does an avoidance maneuver by opening a valve on its liquid oxygen tank and drops away back down towards the Earth. And for now, the Soyuz capsule, the crew inside safely in orbit. All of those automatic commands done successfully. The antennas out, the solar arrays extended. And the vehicle not having any issues, now in its orbit and now ready for its 2-day chase down of the International Space Station. Control from here on out is going to be overseen from the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow and Koryov. But again, as we continue to get a couple of those views inside the cabin, the crew in orbit, a hugely successful launch, no issues with the vehicle, now getting ready to chase down the International Space Station. And so right now, the controllers in Koryov working with the crew on board again, going through a series of commands as they are now in orbit, in microgravity, in outer space, following a flawless 8-minute and 45 ride into orbit.
The repress is deactivated, and we are standing by for the first measurement. Copy that.
And the crew already doing some tests on that core system that they're going to use to automatically dock with the station in 2 days from now.
830, and power pressure inaudible. Now the parameters 14.4, 17.3, 19, 36.6, 20, 1.9, 29, 1.3, 22, 322, 23, 321, 24, 17.1, and 25.
And so again, the crew working now with flight controllers and Koryov going through a couple of initial checkouts on orbit, but they are in space, about to make a 2-day trip towards the International Space Station. We'll stick around for a couple of minutes as we should be getting some replays, hopefully, from the launch site there in Baikonur, where they had several cameras trained on the rocket, so we'll bring those replays when we get them shortly here on NASA TV.
No issues, and now we have course 1 test ongoing. Copy that. EKV activation. We are monitoring. What about the attitude on OSK? Okay, right now the EKV mirrors are being tuned. Copy.
And so in about 10 minutes from now, we'll be able to bring you those replays from down in Baikonur. But
Moscow, this is
right here, we also have another spacecraft in orbit. The very early views of SpaceX's Dragon, about to be making its final approaches to the International Space Station in the next couple of hours. It is still quite a ways off, a few hundred kilometers away, but it's going to be rapidly closing over the next couple of hours and is scheduled to arrive for capture at around 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Eastern. But we'll be bringing you coverage here of Dragon rendezvous and capture coming up at 3:30 a.m. Central, 4:30 a.m. Eastern. So with one spacecraft now in space, tune in back to NASA TV in just a couple of hours and see another one arrive to the International Space Station. That's not the end of our Soyuz coverage, though, as it is set to arrive again on Tuesday. So be sure to tune back in for that. We have a couple of coverage. So again, coming up next is going to be those launch replays. Those should come at about 1:45 a.m. Central Time. And then we'll have our video file with all the post-launch activities, interviews, and those launch replays at 5:30 a.m. Central. And then on Tuesday, December 19th, another early morning at 2 a.m. Central, will come on for docking coverage after the Soyuz has completed 34.5 orbits of Earth. It should dock at 2:43 a.m. And then they'll conduct a series of leak checks, and we'll come back on the air for the hatch opening coverage at 4 a.m. Central, with the hatch opening targeted at 4:35 a.m. Central. And then we'll do our customary video file showing you highlights and replays from all of those activities at 7 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Eastern, again on Tuesday, December 19th. So with that, a successful launch, 3 new crew members in space. They've just left Earth about 16 minutes ago, and now about to chase down the International Space Station. So be sure to tune back in, follow their mission, follow all of our stuff online at nasa.gov/station, and the various crew members across their social media accounts to get a daily dose of space. And for those who want to stay up late with us for that SpaceX Dragon coverage coming up in just a couple of hours. So we'll have launch replays coming up next, but for now we will go ahead and sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.